Bom dia, buenos dias, good morning. Hello, everyone. I'm Bruna Santos, director of the Brazil Institute here at the Wilson Center. We are in a moment when Brazil is poised to expand its global footprint with the presidency of G20, the upcoming COP30 in Belém in 2025. This is an important moment for the Brazil Institute as we are leading the G20 Dialogues, which is an overarching initiative here at the Wilson Center focused on interpreting, on analyzing and promoting engagement opportunities in the G20 in 2024. So today we have the opportunity to delve into Brazil's ambition leading the summit and also its position in the world. And it's my pleasure to welcome today here both Ambassador Maria Luisa Viotti, the U.S. ambassador, the Brazil ambassador in the U.S., and Maurício Lyrio, who is Brazil's Sherpa in the G20. And to get us started, I would like to invite Ambassador Viotti to please deliver her opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Bruna. Dear friends, Ambassador Anthony Harrington, Stanley Gasek, many other friends, friendly faces here with us today. And it's a pleasure for me to be back at the Wilson Center for this discussion on Brazil's priorities for the G20 with Ambassador Maurício Lyrio, our Sherpa. And arguably, the G20 is one of the main global forums for discussion and coordination on economic and financial matters, and also other pressing global issues. And the reason why it continues to matter in the face of so many difficulties, disagreements, geopolitical tensions, is not only because it brings together the largest economies and is more representative than previous blocs in terms of the international balance of power, is mainly because it is still one of the few spaces where leaders can gather and are interested in getting together to dialogue and find solutions based on a cooperative approach. So the fact that it falls on Brazil to lead the G20 this year is a great challenge, of course. But fortunately, we have the right person to take up this task in the person of Ambassador Maurício Lyrio, an accomplished diplomat, someone who has the ability, the skills, the experience, and the energy to lead our work in this process. Ambassador Maurício Lyrio was the ambassador of Brazil to Mexico, to Australia. Prior to that, he was the chief of staff of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He held the position of Secretary for Policy Planning in the Brazilian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and also spokesperson for the minister, and he also served in the Brazilian mission to the UN, the embassies in China, in Argentina, and here in Washington as well. So he is largely experienced and very well suited for this job. And it's very good that he was able to come to Washington very early on in our activities to exchange views and to touch base with his interlocutors here. And the interaction with you today, I think, will also contribute very much to our work in the G20. So, Maurício.
Thank you, Ambassador. So, yeah, we are honored to host you here, Maurício. Welcome to Washington. As Ambassador Viotti said, Maurício Lyrio is the Secretary of Economic and Financial Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Itamaraty, in Brazil, and is Brazil's appointed Sherpa for the G20, which is the country delegate who is orchestrating the summit groundwork. And Ambassador Lyrio, thank you for joining us. And I'm always impressed to learn that the Sherpa track comprises 15 working groups and 2 task forces and 1 initiative. Your work obviously covers a lot of ground, from agriculture to the global mobilization for against climate change, against hunger, and we all want to hear from you your vision for that. But to get us started with this conversation, my first question is, one of the things we saw at the first ministers, financial ministers in February, is that while there was an agreement on economic issues, there was also like some geopolitical disagreements that emerged, that appeared. And that is an impasse that we saw as well last year during the G20 summit in India. We saw, again, a divided G20 on a number of issues. And yeah, this is something we should consider. But considering this, should we expect a different outcome in 2024? And if so, why?
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Bruna, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be in the Wilson Center, in particular in the Brazil Institute. And of course, I'd like to thank the presence of Ambassador Maria Luisa, my boss back in New York, our brilliant permanent representative to the UN, when I had the privilege also to serve there as a minister counselor. And a reference for us all in Itamaraty, as we call the Foreign Service in Brazil, as one of the most brilliant diplomats in our history. So it's a pleasure to be here. We know that, we know, to talk with you with such a good company. Well, about G20, as Ambassador Maria Luisa has said, I would say the crucial element for the existence of G20 and how it was important in the last years was that it is maybe today the most important forum where we still can see the big powers sitting around the same table and discussing issues of, I would say, global importance. We are in a moment of, I would say, growing antagonism, rivalries that are reappearing again, conflicts that are springing everywhere, right? And to have G20 working is I would say, working well, is something that it's not be taken as a given. Back in 2022 in Indonesia, in the Indonesian presidency, because G20, the 19 largest economies plus European Union plus African Union and the new member since the Delhi summit last year, right? It is organized by presidencies, each year one country, right? And that's why I'm mentioning the Indonesian presidency back in 2022 when the war in Ukraine began. By that time, we were not certain, not even if G20 would survive. Because even the summit in Bali was in risk because there was a doubt and some resistance to sit together around the same table. So first point of importance is G20 is crucial for keeping dialogue as a source of, I would say, international coexistence and cooperation in moments in which it seems to be critical, I would say, junctures of our history. So in that sense, we have G20 working with, I would say, this crucial importance as to keep the dialogue alive among great powers, right? After that, the 2022 Indonesian presidency, we had the Indian presidency, which was marked by, I would say, some controversies in terms of language around geopolitical issues. One reason for that is G20 has grown so big in terms of its reach and areas that are covered by the group, because, as Bruna has mentioned, only in the Sherpa track we have 15 working groups, from agriculture to energy, from risk of disaster to corruption, from trade and investments to development. So it's a very rich coverage in terms of subjects and areas of international cooperation. Because of that, we have many ministerial meetings. And having many ministerial meetings, there is some ambition to have always ministerial declarations besides the leader declarations. And while trying to, I would say, prepare declarations like that, when we have conflicts that are happening at the same time while we are negotiating in G20, the temptation to get the best language around geopolitical issues is very strong. Some countries cannot resist that. It's not a critical position. It's just a fact that it happens. We need to put our language there. This is our, I would say, second nature as diplomats and well, representatives of governments. But what happened is that during the Indian presidency, we had some, I would say, problems to have a language on Ukraine, but we managed to have that in the Delhi Declaration. We managed to have these long nights, I would say, without any sleep hours, but we managed to have, it was a successful presidency by India and specifically a successful summit. What we in the Brazilian presidency would like to have, and that's part of our objectives, and that's part that what I'm going to present to you, is that we need to have G20 strong. We need to have G20 which is action-oriented. Our priorities are not beautiful declarations, to tell you frankly. Our priorities are related to have actions that are concrete in terms of the results that G20 can achieve. And we have a general recommendation of, well, the leaders will have a declaration. We are sure about that. But not necessarily we should be concentrated too much attention on the writing of declaration throughout the process and forgetting that we should, I would be very clear on that, should concentrate on the actions that G20 should provide in the many areas that we have, and specifically also in the summit. So the line of Brazil has been this. At the same time, one important issue for Brazil is we need to put the, I would say, the development agenda in the center of the G20 agenda, because we want it to be the center of the international agenda, not G20, but the agenda for development. In the center of the agenda, we would like to see the United Nations together with other groups like the G20. Just a minor precision here. But as President Lula has said from the beginning, we need to have very concrete objectives that are feasible, attainable in our presidency. And for that purpose, and around those issues of development, he has established the 3 priorities that are very clear. I don't know if you have heard before, but first one, social and economic priority, which is to launch a global alliance against hunger and extreme poverty, which is well underway. We have been receiving wide support from G20 countries, and not only G20 countries, countries that are not part of G20, as I had to present a briefing in the UN, and there was wide support not only of G20 countries, but from other countries that are not members of the group. This is, I would say, a well-designed alliance in which we have all the pillars, the financial pillar, what we call the knowledge pillar in terms of the programs that allowed countries to overcome hunger and extreme poverty, and we'll have the pillar of the national commitments of countries in terms either as donors or as beneficiary countries that should adopt some policies in order to overcome hunger. So this is one of the main objectives of the Brazilian presidency, the Global Alliance Against Hunger. We have already a very precise calendar when we are going to, I would say, to convey to the countries the terms of participation, when we are going to open the alliance for the initial manifestations of interest of participation, and we will have our pledging conference in November about this. So it's already well structured, this one very concrete objective for G20. The second one, the mobilization against climate change. The same way we created a task force for the Global Alliance Against Hunger, we also created a task force for the mobilization against climate change. Of course, we are in a very complex moment for negotiations on the environmental, I would say, area, in which we are going to have, throughout this year, tough negotiations around, for example, the question of the new, sorry for being a bit technical, Article 9 of the Paris Agreement, in which we have to define the amounts that rich countries should put for the transition in developing countries to be able to cope with their targets in terms of carbon emission. These will happen together with our presidency of G20, but we established some other specific objectives for the G20 presidency of Brazil, which is to negotiate also alternative sources for financing for climate change. There is another article in the Paris Agreement, 2.1c, sorry, which deals with alternative sources of financing for climate change. It's not well, I would say, implemented, and we need to discuss this further. So Brazil presented this as one of the objectives of the task force. And the other issues that we are going to discuss is the articulation of the national plans for transition, energy transition and transition for climate change. We have lots of plans being developed, but we do not have a very good articulation among them. And one of the objectives of Brazil is to have these very concrete, I would say, not only discussion, but beginning of working together around the national plans in terms of exchange of ideas, exchange of policies, and so on. So this is the second objective, of course. Brazil sees this as an integrated process, because when we talk about sustainable development, we are talking about economic issues, social issues, but we are talking also about environmental issues. And at the center of the environmental agenda is the question of climate change. So putting together Objective 1, Global Alliance Against Poverty and Hunger, with mobilization against climate change as the second objective, we have the whole package of sustainable development. But besides that, one challenge that we have nowadays is the fact that in order to concentrate the discussions in the international agenda around the issues related to development, we need to have functioning and, I would say, updated international institutions to help us to achieve those objectives. In his speech in Hiroshima for the G7 summit, because Brazil was invited as part of the outreach of G7 for the Hiroshima meeting, which was last year, May last year, President Lula has said very clearly, we have global challenges, which are horribly difficult. In order to have countries engaged in implementing commitments to achieve, I would say, our goals around these global challenges, we need to have strong international institutions. Without having a strong multilateralism, without having strong international organizations, we are not going to be able to, I would say, give the incentives for countries to effectively implement their decisions. And we know, for example, climate change. We cannot face this challenge without effective commitments by the governments. But if we do not have strong international institutions that may compel, in a good sense, right, countries to respect and observe and implement those decisions, it will be very difficult to achieve them. We can have beautiful agreements like the Paris Agreement, but no implementation whatsoever, and the result is disaster. So we need to have those institutions strong. And that's why the third objective of the Brazilian presidency is the reform of the global governance. And reform of the global governance, we think in three aspects. The political aspect, the United Nations should be able again to, I would say, to exert its main purpose, which is to avoid war and keep peace. And what we have been seeing is a disastrous moment in international relations in which we have a record number of conflicts. I quote these many times. The IISS from London, International Institute for Strategic Studies, has very frightening statistics showing that last year we had 183 conflicts in the world, either between states or within states, of course, with indirect or direct participation of foreign actors. So we are back, according to these statistics, to the numbers, the figures that we had back in the Cold War. It's a record in 30 years in terms of the number of conflicts. But how can we deal with development challenges if we are so enmeshed in geopolitical conflicts, and if we do not have the international organizations that are able to prevent conflicts and allow us to act in terms of what is effective, the center of the agenda, which should be the development issue. So one objective is to give a push to the reform of the UN. For the first time, G20 will have a second meeting of foreign ministers. For the first time, it will be at the UN headquarters. It will be on September 26th. I had Minister Maurício Lyrio got the support in his in the meeting of foreign minister of G20, which happened already in Rio de Janeiro in February. He had the support of all countries to do that meeting, to organize this meeting in the UN, and we conveyed the message to Secretary General Guterres, who was very welcoming this initiative. And we are going to have the participation of all UN members in this meeting. For the first time, we are going to have a ministerial meeting of the G20 in which all the UN membership will participate in the meeting. And the message is clear. We need to have G20 helping the UN to advance its reform. And we need also to have the contribution of other countries to G20. G20 cannot be, since it's not representative as the UN or other universal international organizations, it has to be more open and, I would say, ready to the dialogue with non-member countries. So this will be the meeting, and in that meeting, we are going to have a call to action. There was wide approval also for having a call to action in favor of the reform of the UN in this meeting, which will be open to all UN members. So the idea is try to use G20 to, I would say, give a push to the reform of the organization. The other aspects of global governance are WTO. How to re-strengthen, reform WTO. It's not that easy. Since I'm the Secretary for Economic Affairs of the Foreign Ministry in Brazil, and since the Foreign Ministry in Brazil is in charge of trade negotiations, I was in Abu Dhabi together with Minister Maurício Lyrio, who had the delegation there. And what can we say about the negotiations in Abu Dhabi? Once again, a very difficult one, once again showing that the organization is not up to the task of facing a moment of increasing protectionism, real difficulties of putting together countries in order to have, I would say, not exactly trade agreements, but I would say normal rules of coexistence in terms of trade and economic relations, right? So it's a terrible moment for the WTO too. We have a dispute settlement mechanism that does not work. We did not manage to have some other agreements. Brazil has been supporting the incorporation of agriculture for a long time. We have lots of unfinished business, and this is one thing that we would like to see advancing again. G20 not necessarily is the forum that managed to give a push to the WTO, but at least the right message we should send about this. And the third one, in terms of the global governance reform, is the question of the financial architecture, the role of the Bretton Woods institutions, MDB, which are the multilateral development banks, how we can use them better to concentrate on the agenda for sustainable development. And this includes climate, but this includes also fighting poverty, reducing hunger, and so on. And we know nowadays that they are not up to the task that we face ahead. The task is huge, but the institutions at the same time have not reformed enough in order to be up to the task in terms of volume of capital, in terms of representativeness. We have all this dilemma about quota, voice, vote in the IMF and the World Bank, and we need to have them, as President Lula announced, with President Biden, with Prime Minister Modi in Delhi, and together with the President of the World Bank. We need big, better, and more effective multilateral banks, but we need them more representative too, because the world has changed. It's no longer the world that we had 8 decades before. So these are huge challenges. In terms of global governance, we have, I would say, G20 is not a group that provide, I would say, norms that are implemented as binding by countries. It's not an international organization, right? It's a group that has the power of influencing other organizations to advance certain agendas. So that's the role of G20 in that sense. But it's very influential because the biggest powers are there. And at the same time, it has a positive characteristics that it's influential, but at the same time, it is varied. We have rich, well, developed and developing countries. We have countries from all regions. So in a way, despite the underrepresentation of certain regions like Africa, which has only one member in G20, and now we have the African Union, so this underrepresentation is not something that we consider to be right. But at the same time, it has sufficient, I would say, multiplicity and complexity so that we have important and influential actors, but with a view which is, I would say, complex enough to help to push some agendas in the international system, mostly for other negotiations, like COPs in the case of climate change, like the UN as general. So this is also another important deliverable that we would like to have by the summit. We will be in Rio in November 18 and 19 in Rio de Janeiro, to have, I would say, the leaders pushing for a reform of those institutions. One aspect that is very important for our presidency also, and of course the presence here, this discussion here is important for this too, is that the Brazilian government, President Lula himself, from the beginning has said we need also in the Brazilian presidency to have a closer relation, more frequent interaction with civil society. G20, we were talking about the structure of G20. We have the Sherpa track, in which we have the 15 working groups, plus the 2 task forces that Brazil has created as provisional. That's why they are task force, because we do not want to create new working groups. It's for those specific tasks. But we have also the finance track, which is the, I would say, the origin of G20, because G20 up to 2008, it was created in 1999, was exclusively devoted to financial discussions. It was a group of finance ministers. And in 2008, it was transformed in a summit leaders-driven group with this whole agenda, which started to grow from there with some working groups, and now we have 15. But besides this, we have also the engagement groups of G20. We have traditionally 11. Brazil has added, on the request of Minister Barroso, the President of the Supreme Court of Brazil, to add also a meeting of the presidents of the Supreme Courts. We are going to have this in Rio in May this year. So we have 11 groups dealing with I'll quote some of them. L20, labor movements. T20, think tanks, groups. In the case of Brazil, SEBRE, IPEA, and SEBRE, IPEA, and FUNAG from the Ministry of External Relations of Brazil. They are the 3 institutions that are organizing this. T20 is very important because, as I opened together with my colleagues from those institutions, the T20 this year in a video conference, and what we have been saying is that we need fresh ideas. The world seems too old in terms of the solutions that we are providing, and we need to be innovative because the challenges are much more complex than we could expect. So we need fresh ideas, and coming from civil society too. Right, and think tanks, of course, by definition, they are thinking, right? And we should have the input that they could provide too. And so what we are doing is that T20, L20, W20, which is women's 20. But besides that, we have for the first time the working group on empowerment of women in the official track of G20 also in Brazil.
B20?
B20, the Business 20, CNI in Brazil, CNI in Brazil is organizing. Many other ones, Youth 20, Y20. So all those groups are discussing issues around the G20 agenda, and they will provide to us, because two innovations that we are doing in our presidency is that in the Sherpa's meeting of mid-year, beginning of July, I am going to receive the inputs of the engagement groups in order to negotiate with other countries what we can incorporate in the Leaders' Declaration. But besides that, we are going to have like a forum for putting all engagement groups together before the summit in Rio de Janeiro, some days before the summit, which we are calling the G20 Social, to put together all the engagement groups so that they can provide also to the leaders or convey to the leaders a message on what are the main priorities in terms of the civil society. It's not an easy task, but Brazil has some experience on that. For example, in the summit of the Amazon now, we had a very good social forum in which it was, well, with a huge presence of social civil society movements there. We have in Mercosur also the Mercosur forum in which the presidents listen from leaders of the civil society. In the case of G20, we are studying how we are going to do that because it's a bit more complex. Many participants. Besides the 21, we have the invited countries, we have the international organizations, so we are checking how we could do that. But the idea is to have a stronger interaction between the official tracks of G20 and also civil society. So in general lines, these are the priorities of G20 of Brazil. We hope we can, I would say, contribute to the agenda of the group. First, contribute to the strengthening of the group, because it's very important in terms of being one of the main forum internationally to discuss, as I said, to keep the dialogue alive in such a complex juncture in international relations that we are witnessing recently. But at the same time, we want to have G20 leaning towards more discussions around the issues of development. And that's why we established this agenda. We are very happy that we are doing everything very coordinated with our successor in G20, which will be South Africa. Because we have a fortunate moment in which, for us, developing country, we have 4 countries in a row in the presidency of G20, because we had Indonesia in 22, India in 23, Brazil in 24, South Africa in 25. Well, the last 3 ones are the IBSA members. The Troika, the current Troika is the IBSA members, India, Brazil, and South Africa. And because of that, we see this as an opportunity to put back in the agenda the issues around development issues. Geopolitics are not helping. Unfortunately, the situation is dire in terms of the conflicts that we are facing and so on. But at the same time, we need to keep the priority around those issues. That's why we are also working in close coordination with those other countries. Well, I don't know if I spoke too much or too, well, beyond my time, but I would be glad to also answer some questions, whether in case you have some interest. Thank you.
Absolutely. Can I start myself asking a question very briefly? Okay. This question can be also, if you want to comment, Ambassador, is the U.S. and Brazil coordinating in the regards of the global economic governance reform? How is the pulse of that cooperation and vision towards that?
Well, yes, we have been. Well, I came here also after going to New York to brief the UN General Assembly. I came here also to have conversations both with multilateral development banks, Inter-American Development Bank and the World Bank, also with my colleagues that work directly with G20 in the National Security Council and also in the Department of State. We are very much coordinated. The US has shown support, a very strong support for Brazil in this. I heard this from the former Sherpa. He was replaced by a new colleague now, whom I'm going to visit. From the beginning, National Security Advisor Sullivan, Secretary of State Blinken, they have conveyed a strong message that we are very much together in trying to have a strong G20 this year. So we are very confident on that. The reform of the financial architecture is a more delicate issue in the sense that it's not that easy. G20 has a role to push for some reform since the beginning of G20, because the first, I would say, call for a broad reform of the financial architecture was back in 2009 with the Gordon Brown's London G20 summit. The declaration is very clear. The implementation is not that good. We had some reform in the IMF, but it was a small one after this, but not the full implementation of what we had envisaged there. And President Lula was there, and he mentioned to us, I was there, that's why I need a very action-oriented G20, because we have beautiful declarations. According to the London Declaration, the financial architectural, financial architecture as a whole is already, would be, I would say, we are in 24, 15 years afterwards, it's already a brand new one and working wonderfully. And of course, it's not necessarily like that. And so it's a very difficult issue. We are pushing for reform on that, but this is a parallel track with the negotiations within the institutions, right? Mm-hmm. And so what we want with G20 is to, again, like the UN reform, it's not G20 that will which is going to do the reform, because it's not representative of all membership of the UN, but it can give a push. The same is the view that we have about this on the financial architecture. And, President Lula, together with President Biden, Prime Minister Modi, and the President of the World Bank announced the bigger, better, and more effective back in Delhi. So we are together on that. Mm-hmm. Some, I would say, wise words from you to the U.S. Congress would be welcome on that respect.
That's excellent. I would take one question here, in front row. We have, I think, 85 people watching us. We are live streaming the event. And I will also take some questions from the audience watching us online, please.
Hello, thank you for doing this. My name is Arina Halina with TASS News Agency. And my question is, does Brazil intend to use the G20 mechanism in order to try to settle the crisis in Ukraine? And are there any particular concrete plans for the leaders' meeting in November?
Well, thank you for the question. What we have been saying, Brazil has been saying, is that issues of peace and security have to be dealt by the UN, the United Nations, right? Because this is the adequate forum to do that. But at the same time, in G20, we want to convey the message, and that's what we did in New Delhi, that we need to have, I would say, advance in the negotiations for peace. This is something that we have been saying from the beginning. President Lula, from the beginning of the conflict, the most repeated word by him was peace. We need peace, right? And in that sense, I think that G20 is not the forum to negotiate this process, but at the same time can convey the right message. And I think that the Delhi Declaration of G20 of last year, which was agreed by all countries, including I would say all countries directly or indirectly involved in the war in Ukraine. This declaration has said very clearly we need to have the UN Charter principles as the basis for a process of peace in Ukraine, and we need to have peace in Ukraine, right? So this is the message that G20 has conveyed in the declaration of last year, and of course, the case of Brazil, which has been supporting discussions around peace on Ukraine, it's the same message that we would like to convey this year also in G20.
Thank you.
Excellent, please.
Thank you. Nabil Ahmed from Oxfam. We work in over 80 countries around the world on inequality and development issues. And for those of us who are working on inequality, poverty and development issues, Ambassador, I want to start by saying thank you, because this is already a historic and pivotal presidency, and we underscore appreciation to President Lula and the presidency for highlighting and centering these issues amid an inequality crisis. If I was to center one question, is the issue of individual taxation of the world's richest people. We saw a priority given to that at the finance ministerial and human energy around that. I'd love to ask how you see the potential for progress on this issue and the extent to which it helps that, for example, the administration here in the United States has a very progressive agenda at home on this issue. So wonderful to hear from that. And a connected small second question is, how do you see the legacy of this presidency to redress the global inequalities that we see, Ambassador? Thank you.
Well, thank you for your question. You mentioned the word that President Lula himself has said. If I had to summarize what is the core problem of the international system nowadays, or the international, I would say, relations and the world nowadays, is inequality. That's why in the case of G20, we have the three big priorities. One of them is clearly related, all of them are clearly related to reducing inequality, right? But there is also an instruction that we have given to the groups that this issue of inequality should be, I would say, a cross-cutting concern that we should have in all groups. For example, there is a group in the Sherpa track, which is the digital economy group. The issue of the digital divide has to be dealt by the group. We need to find ways to reduce inequality and to have better access to digital, I would say, skills and so on, and means too. So this is central, and President Lula has said from the beginning. In the case of the progressive taxation, this is another issue related to that, because one of the challenges that we have nowadays is how to find additional sources of resources for advancing the agenda of sustainable development in its three aspects. The social one, in terms of fighting poverty and hunger, economic ones, having access to decent jobs and so on, and the third one, fighting climate change, protecting the environment, and so on. And one of the possibilities, and Minister Haddad, the Minister of Finance of Brazil, is very much engaged in trying to advance on this agenda of the progressive taxation, including, well, individuals, right, as you mentioned, because we see G20 as a forum in which we could advance the discussion. So that's why in São Paulo, in the finance ministers' meeting, this was one of the most discussed issues. We see an important role for G20 for, I would say, putting this item in the, I would say, agenda for all the economic, discussions that we are having on those issues, on all the issues of taxation. Because we have, all the discussions, Pillar 1, Pillar 2, the question of the OECD taxation framework and so on, but also this question should be dealt, and I think that we are going to have, I hope, some positive results on the evolution of this dialogue among G20 countries. Okay.
I have a question from Catherine New from Microsoft. She asks, which objective are you most concerned about achieving, and where are you most confident that you will see progress among the things that you listed?
Yes, thank you. Well, I mentioned the three priorities of the Brazilian government, the three general priorities. But of course, for each working group, we have specific priorities. I mentioned before to my colleagues from here, the Brazil Institute. For example, we have the working group on health issues. There will be a ministerial meeting in Rio de Janeiro 3 weeks before the summit of the ministers of health. And there are clear priorities for this working group. For example, we are dealing with regional production of vaccines. It's a priority for the working group. We are dealing with digital medicine, digital health systems. We are dealing with the question of the negotiation of the fund for pandemics. And so for each one of them, we hope to have sectoral achievements, right? And since we have 15 working groups, we are very, I would say, optimistic that in most of them we are going to have very good deliverables. And that's why we are thinking of the declaration of the leaders being, if possible, the main text, a short declaration. This is ambitious because to have a short declaration of leaders is never something very easy to accomplish. But at the same time, we are going to have the list of deliverables coming from the working groups and also a plan of action of other achievements that we would like to have ahead, right? And so to tell about concrete results, well, one that obviously we would like to have a big result is the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, because we think now that we are in a better position, I would say, to articulate the question of the financial support and the question which is crucial, which is the knowledge that we have accumulated in the last 2 decades about which are the successful policies for overcoming hunger and extreme poverty in developing countries. These we did not have before. And now we have, in terms of cash transfer programs, school meals programs, family farming, single registry, and also social security. Now we have expertise of developing countries that managed to have advances on that we did not have back in, well, 3 decades ago or 2 decades ago. So we think that in those cases we can have very concrete results, but G20 should be thought this way. Besides these concrete actions, it is also, as I said, a group that tries to push the reform and the advances in other multilateral negotiations.
I have time to one more question only, and I would appreciate if you could be quick. Please, there's one over there in the end. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, Alejandro Sanchez. I'm an analyst here in Washington, D.C. Very quickly, one country that you have not talked about in your remarks is Haiti. During the ministerial meetings a couple of weeks ago, the United States and Brazil co-hosted an event on Haiti. President Lula talked about Haiti when he went to Guyana for a CARICOM meeting. Secretary Blinken went to Jamaica just this week, I believe, to discuss Haiti. So as you want to since you want the G20 to focus on hunger and extreme poverty, well, Haiti obviously comes to mind. Finally, Brazil has a very recent history regarding Haiti because of MINUSTA. So will the G20 focus on Haiti in the coming months? Thank you.
Well, of course, it is also discussed in the G20. But there are also many other issues being discussed in G20. So we are going to see how it evolves, the question of the weight of the issue Haiti in G20. But what we have been saying about this topic is that the view of Brazil about Haiti and other, I would say, least developed countries, right, is that we need to have a broad approach in terms of to see the development of the country as a whole, and not to be always dealing with emergencies and urgencies derived from security issues. It's important to have a more comprehensive, I would say, policy and strategy for countries like Haiti, as Brazil has had during the MINUSTA, in which our mission was very much, I would say, enriched by the idea that the security issues should be dealt jointly with the developmental issues. If we do not, I would say, concentrate attentions, resources, focus in the question of fighting hunger, fighting poverty, reducing inequality, it's very difficult to have, I would say, a stable security picture. So we need to have a more comprehensive approach. This has been the position of Brazil for a long time, and we hope that the international community should adopt this, not only for Haiti, but for all countries that face this mangling of basic development, I would say, challenge and security issues derived in large part from that. So we need to face those situations in a more comprehensive and broad and complex way.
Thank you, Ambassador. Well, thank you, everyone, for attending. Count on us for ideas. I will make sure they're fresh, as you requested. Thank you again, everyone, and everyone who's attending us. And keep tuned in the Brazil Institute and G20, because we are having a number of upcoming events and initiatives. Thank you.